What's going on, guys? It's the Ancient Greek here, and today we're going to be talking about classical Athens, and we're really going to be answering the question of why wasn't Athens as successful as Rome and the Roman Empire, and why wasn't the Athenian Empire as successful and powerful as the Roman Empire ultimately. In fact, it was nowhere near as powerful and successful. So, really, it all starts, of course, with Attica, which is right here. So this whole region that is being outlined here is known as Attica in the greater nation of Greece. But, of course, as we know at the time, Greece was not a central unified nation. It was divided up into many different nations that all flew under their own flag, so to speak. So the Spartans were located down here in Laconia. Then there was the Mycenaeans, largely under domination by the Spartans. There's the Arcadians over here, also largely under domination by the Spartans, also partially under domination by the Ionians sometimes, especially down here. This region was highly contested between Arcadians and Ionians, and it flip-flopped back and forth between the two. And this region, I believe, is called Tryphilla. This region is called Tryphilla here. And anyway, Achaia is up here. They were independent from everyone for their entire existence, pretty much. And there's Corinth, we all know that. Megaris, largely under the dominion of Athens, after they had the War of Independence with Corinth. There's Boeotia, the Boeotian League. There's Phocis, which has Delphi, which is up here, and a couple other places too. If I bring up the icons here, I think I can see. Maybe. And then Malice, this is really... So this map is not very accurate in that this is supposed to be Thessaly and it's supposed to be bigger and longer. And Thessaly practically doesn't exist on this map. I mean, Malice is really just... It's Thessaly. Like if you go over here, it's Thessaly, and this region is not mountainous. This is a giant plain. Thessaly is known for having the best horses in Greece. So, and then there's Macedonia, of course, up here with the Chalkidiki Peninsula and everything. So there we go. And all the islands in the Aegean Sea. And Athens is kind of at the center, almost, of all of this. And they develop from basically nothing, basically just a small village by the mountain that is now, by classical times, known as the Acropolis. And they had nothing. They eventually ended up building this giant golden statue of Athena under Pericles, and also these theaters and everything like that, and all of these different places. And here's actually, this is Pericles himself. This is actually a picture of Pericles. So, Pericles comes to power pretty much at the beginning of the period of classical Athens. I mean, not really the beginning if you consider the Greco-Persian Wars to be the classical period. There were a few that came before him during the Greco-Persian Wars, heroes and rulers like, I mean, Miltiades wasn't a ruler, but he was a general who commanded Athenian forces at the Battle of Marathon, and then there was Themistocles, of course, we all know, the great Athenian naval commander who kicked Persian butt at Salamis. And all these people start coming out who really show, they show their legitimacy by their actions. They step up, fight for Athens, fight for Attica, show Attica what they can do. So those people like Themistocles and Miltiades really play a huge role in showing Athens what they can do. And Athens, at this point, starts getting really, really confident, and as the classical period really starts to roll in, Athens looks outward from Attica with its newly established navy that was established by Themistocles. And they start seeing that, hey, we can start taking over all these islands, and form something called the Delian League. Now, the Delian League is really, really the core of the answer to the question of why Athens didn't end up becoming the Greek-Roman Empire, basically. And this island is called Delos. And this is the island that the Delian League is named after. And Athens already has much influence over the island of Chios, and Paros and Naxos are two big ones that have always been under Athenian influence, and Delos as well, and Mykonos. Mykonos is a little bit more independent, but still they're both generally under Athenian influence. But Athens starts going out. They even go out to Kos, take over Kos. They go out to now Milos is, we're going to get to that, that's pretty interesting. So they take over Hydria, they take over Seriphos, they take over Andros, Skyros, Euboea gets taken over, Lemnos, Lesbos, Chios, Thasos, all those places, even a lot of places along the Chalkidiki, which is where they come to blows with Corinth a little bit later on, actually before the Peloponnesian War starts. And so Athens is going around and securing all these islands and all these territories into what is known as the Delian League, as has been previously established. And the Delian League is not really, it doesn't really give Athens 100% control over all the territories that are inside the league. So all these islands are basically separate city-states, pretty much. I mean, they're all their own separate states. And even though they might not have only one city on them, they can pretty much be considered as the same kind of political structure as a city-state. And they exist as their own independent nations. And they're all coming under the rule of Athens, but only indirectly. You see, they have to pay tribute either in the form of money, or if they don't have enough of that, in the form of ships. Because they each have their own militaries. They have their own triremes, they have their own ships, and their own locally recruited crews to man them. But, of course, these militaries are not powerful enough to defeat the Athenian army, which is why a lot of them just so easily came under the rule of Athens, except for Milos, which is I'm going to get to in a sec. So, the Delian League is like an indirect ruling where you either have to pay money to Athens or you have to pay tribute in the form of ships being added to the Athenian navy. And Athens kind of organized this empire of dependent states, and Samos was in it too. I don't know if I mentioned earlier. They organized a bunch of independent island states to basically strengthen the Athenian navy to the point where they would be unrivaled at sea. They would be undominable. indomitable. No one would be able to take out Athens at sea. No one would be able to trump them, and they would just go around and basically run the show in the Aegean Sea, control all trade, and all of that great stuff. So this works really well for Athens, because all the trade routes, the one that goes up here through Byzantium, which Byzantium is off the map, but it goes up here through Byzantium, through the Bosporus Strait, and into the Black Sea. And that's a vital grain route, because the Bosporan kingdom, which is basically the kingdom of the Cimmerian Bosphorus, is up in Crimea, what is known today as Crimea in the Black Sea. It's basically a bunch of Greek cities that formed up into a giant kingdom, and they control almost all of the Crimean Peninsula. Their capital is Panticapam, and they produce lots of grain, which gets shipped to Athens. And Athens needs this grain, and it's a lifeline. And we'll see that Byzantium ends up being a center of conflict in the Peloponnesian War for that reason. I mean, Sparta sees taking Byzantium as a real opportunity to choke the Athenians and starve them. But all of this is done to increase the wealth of Attica, specifically Athens. And even Attica itself is exploited. The Laurian silver mines are pretty famous. The Athenians mined the heck out of these mines and got so much silver and made so many of those amazing Athenian owl coins that we all know. Athenian drachmae, tetrachtims. And Athens built itself into a super power of Greece. And the Dorian states were starting to really not like this, and Boeotia wasn't liking it either. Boeotia isn't Dorian, by the way, it's Aeolic Greek, but they weren't liking it either. And they all decided to form up into an alliance with each other called the Peloponnesian League. And here is where the notion of Greek freedom comes in, and the notion of you can never really control a Greek state. It starts with the Dorians forming the Peloponnesian League, and also with the Athenians taking over Melos. Now, the Athenian conquest of Melos is a huge thing, in that it shows that Greek freedom is the most powerful thing in Greece, and it cannot be simply taken away. So, here's Melos. Athens wants Melos to join the Delian League. Melos has been supporting the Spartans in their formation of the Peloponnesian League, and as the Peloponnesian War starts, they've been supporting Spartans with supplies and a little bit here and there, as much as they can handle. I mean, they're just a small island. But they support the Spartans, and the Athenians don't like it. They want them to be part of the Delian League. The Melians, with their Dorian descent, don't want to be part of the Delian League, and even if they don't want to become part of Sparta, they consider themselves to be independent from Sparta, they still consider themselves to be Dorian and friends of Sparta with their equal blood, same blood. Or we have the same blood, so we're friends, kind of thing. So, here Athens is sailing out with its navy to take Melos. Athens comes once and ravages the countryside and forces Melos to pay a small price, and Melos still doesn't back down, and they still lash out, declaring their independence against Athens. And Athens sends another invasion fleet, and this time they besiege Melos' main city, which we are not entirely sure what it's called. I mean, right now we just know it as Melos. I mean, the island's name is Melos, and this city's name is Milos, and that's pretty much the only conclusion we can come to. We don't really know what this city was called. For some reason, the information is lost to us. And here it even says it was founded by Spartan settlers on a volcanic island. Milos is a volcanic island. And Milos' main city goes by the same name. There you go. So these, the historical researchers who made this game, Assassin's Creed Odyssey, just come to the conclusion that Milos goes by the same name as the island. The city goes by the same name as the island. So, yeah, so this island was known for sulfur and obsidian. That pretty much went downhill after the Stone Age was over, because no one needs obsidian when you're in the Bronze Age, because bronze is much better than obsidian for making tools and weapons. So they were great in the Stone Age. After the Stone Age, severe decline, because obsidian is not popular anymore at that point. So Athens comes in, besieges Milos, and after several attempts to break into the city, they are beaten back by the Melians, and the Melians sally out and attempt to break the Athenian line. They almost succeed. They come very close, but the Athenians roll around and push them back, and the Melians are forced back into the city. Eventually, the siege ends with an Athenian victory. Athens goes in, exiles the entire male population, and sells the entire women and children population into slavery. And that's pretty much the end of it. So Milos loses its independence and I guess effectively becomes part of the Delian League, even though there's no people. So, and that is actually because Athens sends its own settlers to inhabit the island. Now, eventually Sparta would come in, exile the Athenian settlers, and resettle all the male settlers who were exiled, and all the women and children who would have evacuated, who actually got to evacuate on time, back to Milos, and Milos would be made a part of Sparta, basically. So Milos would lose its independence. But, in the end, that moment was a moment of defiance to Athens' power and expansion, and that is the critical reason of why Athens was not as successful as Rome. Greek freedom and Greek independence is so important to the Greeks that it's unimaginable. Anytime a city-state tries to rise up and just take everything over and become the new Agamemnon of Greece, every Greek starts lashing out and supporting that state's freedom, because freedom is just such a central thing and an important thing, and it all ties into the idea of a city-state, the idea of one city being its own nation, having its own independent culture, its own flag, its own army, its own everything, its own economy, currency. I mean, the currency's the same, but across all of Greece, but I mean, having its own coins, having its own literally everything. And that's why the Delian League couldn't establish 100% control over all of its territories like the Roman Empire did. Instead, Athens had to make everyone pay tribute to Athens. And those states remained independent in the sense that they were city-states, but in the end they were all subservient to Athens and they paid tribute, but they were still independent. So that's where it all comes in. There's no 100% control in ancient Greece, not until Philip II of Macedon comes around. Now, when he comes around, he doesn't give a damn. He wants 100% control, and he gets it over most of Greece, except for Elis and Sparta, and actually Athens eventually ends up breaking away and becoming independent too after a little while. And the reason why Philip was able to do that is because he was so advanced with the reforms that he made to the Macedonian army, and he was so up with the times that he just could afford to go through and not even care and kick everybody's butt, especially at the Battle of Chaeronea, because he just was so far ahead militarily of all the other Greeks that he knew that he could just easily crush them in any attempt that they had to resist him. But even Philip II didn't take away the freedom of all the Greeks. And that's why Athens couldn't become like Rome. They weren't in the right nation, in the right all-encompassing country. They weren't like Greece is not the right place to be to make an empire. They weren't in the right region, and they weren't in the right situation culturally and even strategically. And why I say they weren't in the right situation strategically is because Sparta was the dominant land power, and all of their allies were like Corinth here, and Arcadia here was basically part of Sparta. And it created a clear path straight into Attica for the Spartan army to march, and Sparta was the dominant land power in the Peloponnese, with no question about it. And it was so easy for the Spartans to just come around and besiege Athens, and that's it. And the only way Athens would survive was by the sea, which was no problem because they had firm control over the sea. But once the Spartans figured out something nifty, they could take Athens, whereas ships at sea are never going to be able to go on to land and defeat a land army. So being the dominator on land is always better, because humans, we're land creatures. We exist on land. We're not meant to be at sea. We're not fish. Sea is not our home base. Sea is just a conduit we use to travel. But being a professional on sea doesn't guarantee that you'll never be taken over unless you're just a little island like Chios and you happen to have the best navy in Greece. And then you actually have a really, really good chance of survival, because no one will ever be able to reach you without bypassing your insanely strong navy. But Athens didn't see that it wasn't in the same situation as Chios or Delos or any of these other little islands, because they were attached to the land that was the same land that the Spartans walked on. And the Spartans were just as good as them as far as like skill in being a Greek city-state and prosperity and all that sort of stuff. They prospered in a different way, of course, but they were still bad to the bone. And you know, I know I said before that Athens is probably my favorite Greek city-state ever to exist, but in reality, I mean, that was sort of a lie, and I apologize a little bit for that, but I guess, you know, everybody says stuff every once in a while. But Athens isn't really my favorite Greek city-state, and there's a few reasons why. I'll just break to you what my favorite Greek city-state really is, and that is Sparta, right here. Sparta is my favorite Greek city-state, and this time I'm 100% real about it. Sparta is definitely, without a doubt, my favorite Greek city-state. I love Sparta to the core, and it's actually pretty incredible because I think I might even have some DNA ties to Sparta, but save that entire discussion for another video. And actually, after I make these videos on Athens, this actually might even be my last video I make on Athens. I'm going to start making maybe 1 or 2, possibly more videos on Sparta. So Sparta is the next topic after Athens, essentially. So now I'm going to go down to Athens itself. I'm going to go down to the Acropolis, right on top of the statue of Athena, and I'm just going to take a walk around Athens and just discuss how their life was, how they got prosperity, how they planned everything out, organized everything, and let's get right into it. So yeah, Athens is really, really, really fortunate to have gotten such a jump on the Persians at sea in the Greco-Persian Wars that they were able to establish the Delian League, but in the end, it just isn't enough when in comparison to a land army. Athens also had another thing that played a little bit of a tricky role and a lot of an unfair role when it comes to Athens and the Delian League, and that's the fact that they had a democracy. Athenian democracy was great in Athens, but if you were in any other state in the Delian League, of course, since those states were basically independent but under the rule of Athens, they went by their own governments, and sometimes the Athenians would establish their own rulers in those states. At least I think they would have. And here's a nice view of Athens. And those states would be under the rule of their own governments, and sometimes even Athenian elected rulers, and that just isn't fair because Athens has all the beauty of their own democracy, yet these guys, all these members of the Delian League are just not getting that experience at all. In fact, they just feel like they're basically slaves of Athens. I'm going to change into a character that's a little bit more appropriate for where we are. There we go. Athenian soldier. So yeah, let's just jump off this statue and land into a haystack and be alive, which is something that would totally not be true at all. But here we are, the Acropolis. There's Parthenon up there. This is the gigantic statue of Athena. I believe it was made out of solid gold. Might have been made out of solid bronze. Might have been gold plated. Who really knows? I mean, it's not there anymore, so we can't really know. But definitely looks gold. Actually looks bronze, to tell you the truth. But it looks like her crest on her head and some of the stuff at the top of her upper body, like her hair coming down, I believe that is. I think that is made out of gold, because you see, at least in the game, it's like a different shade than the rest of the statue. And these are just various temples that people can go into. Looks like a confession box. No, this is this is the place where probably the high priests would be staying and just hanging out as they like made various fabrics and stuff like that. Women would sit here and make fabrics. And here is the Acropolis Sanctuary. So if we take a look at this, this is actually the olive tree of Athena. And this is a bronze coin depicting Athena standing by her olive tree. So here's a picture of that. So you see those amazing Athenian coins. Now this isn't exactly the same as what we're used to with the owl. And the thing about the Athenian owl coin is it was a very very high centerpiece of democracy in the Greek world, not just like in the sense of it being Athenian, but democracy itself. It was a symbol of it. And it's kind of funny because the way Athens treated everyone in their empire wasn't exactly democratic. It was more like, you do whatever we want or you're in trouble. But showing the text, it basically says that it was planted in 1952 by members of the American School of Archaeology, and it's conveniently believed to be descended from a sacred olive tree planted during the foundation of Athens. So that was basically a sacred olive tree that was apparently burned by the Persians in 480 BCE, and it grew from its ashes the same day. That is impressive for a tree to be able to do that. That's pretty awesome. I would definitely like to see that myself. And here we have the Erechtheion. The Erechtheion Carotids is basically maidens performing the role of pillars in a temple. And many ancient buildings had these sorts of things, but the most famous is this one, apparently. And they were actually inspired by women from the Laconian town of Caria near Sparta. So these inhabitants of this city betrayed the Greeks by plotting with the Persians and all that sort of stuff. So there's a lot of interesting stories where Athens kind of draws its color from, colors and culture from, I suppose. And Athens really does the same thing as Rome in a lot of ways by doing this, because they kind of draw on all the various cultures of Greece as the Romans drew on all the various cultures of the peoples they encountered as they were expanding their empire. And that basically created an effect where Athens is the centerpiece of all Greek culture. It is the place where all culture across all of Hellas, Greece, converges into one. And we are now walking into the Parthenon, and the Parthenon, according to this game, was used as the state treasury, and here's all the wealth that Athens has amassed from its dealings across the Aegean Sea, with all the other islands that it imposed its authority over and everything. All of this gold has been stockaded up in this Parthenon temple for safekeeping and use for gigantic campaigns that ended up being insane failures, like the Sicilian expedition, which was just completely devastating to Athens' morale and their standing in Greece as a whole, and their military prowess, for sure. Meanwhile, Sparta was kicking Athenian butt on land and besieging Athens, to the point of Athens even having a plague. So Athens was a little bit too confident for their own good, and they were too confident compared to what they had the power to do. They wanted so much, but they just weren't big enough and good enough to achieve it. They thought like, oh, we have the best navy in Greece, that means we can literally trump every single Greek city-state in Greece and become the ultimate dominator. It's like, no, that's not how it works. Your land army has to be good, buddy. Even Xerxes, with his insane numbers, just insane, we think possibly like 400,000, around 400,000 at the Battle of Thermopylae, against like 1,200 Greeks including 300 Spartans, the famous 300. And the Spartans held them off every single day for like 3 or 4 days until the Persians finally found a way to encircle them. Had they not known of that goat path, had Ephialtes not betrayed the Spartans, the Persians would have never been able to go through, I can imagine, because the Spartans weren't even breaking a sweat. And so that's the kind of stuff that Athens has to deal with. And yeah, sure, Athens has like Greek equipment and everything like that too. And they have Greek prowess, but their soldiers aren't as good as Spartans. That's what we all know very well. They just aren't as good. And they tried to make themselves, see this altar? Pottery, black figure, red figure, all that sort of stuff. It's all a representation of Athens' domination over the Greek world and their cultural domination, specifically. And Pericles wanted to make Athens into a defensive player in the Peloponnesian War, just hiding behind Athenian walls, keeping the trade going, protecting vital conduits that serve as the lifeline to Athens. And like if we go back out to the map, so he wanted to basically hide behind these walls. He built these famous walls that give like a pathway to the Piraeus, the famous port of Athens. And he basically wanted to defend trade routes, launch military expeditions using the wealth from the state treasury that we just viewed earlier, and just launch military expeditions where Athens can score critical victories and critical hits against its enemies, and just keep holding out like that as long as they can, and not letting the Spartans touch them. But of course that doesn't work, because the Spartans are just going to go around, they're going to ransack the mines of Laurium, they're going to put an end to all of Athens' resources that exist outside the city itself, and Athens just isn't going to be able to make it in the long run, because they're never going to be able to defeat Sparta. No matter how many things they do at sea, Sparta's the land dominator, so it really doesn't matter what Athens tries to do at sea, how many military expeditions they try to launch. Now, Syracuse was a serious bid to secure some power on the side of Athens, but Syracuse isn't even the only example. Demosthenes tried to go up here into this region and invade Aetolia, where the Athenian League formed, and take them out and bring them under the rule of Athens, but Demosthenes ended up getting kicked back and defeated and lost pretty miserably, so miserably in fact that he was too afraid to return to Athens, as he feared for his own life. And then he launched another expedition against the Spartans, scored a victory, lost a battle, and it was just, the results of Athens' strategy under Pericles are very mixed. And then this guy called Cleon comes to power. And Cleon is basically an aggressor. He's the opposite of Pericles. He wants Athens to lash out. He doesn't want them to just sit behind their walls, fortify their cultural power, and continue their research and science and technology and all that sort of stuff inside the city. He doesn't want Athens to focus too much inward. He wants Athens to go out and hit back and punch the Spartans and punch all their enemies. And Cleon saw some success at the beginning when he took power after Pericles' death during the Plague of Athens, but in the end, his strategy ended up failing as well, because Athens just wasn't good enough. As I said before, they aren't the land-dominating power. No matter what they do at sea, it isn't really going to matter in the long run. Sparta dominates all of Greece over here, over land, and again, even though they're able to successfully strike at so many places around Greece, it will not do anything to secure Athens' victory. Victory. Now think about what that means. Victory means Athens controls all of this. Now think about it. With Sparta there, is that ever going to happen? No. Athens isn't going to be able to land on the coast and march overland without getting decimated by a vastly superior Spartan army. I mean, not vastly superior, but superior Spartan army. And no, it's just not going to happen. So, of course, Athens is just stuck, basically. They're good with what they have, and they should have just kept what they had and not tried to pick a fight with everybody. But I guess that was really inevitable too, because of, again, that notion of Greek freedom, that notion of, like, even though they would have just kept what they have, the Peloponnesian League formed with the idea of dismantling Athens' Delian League because they believed that it was a move for Athens to secure an empire. And so there you have it. The Peloponnesian League was inevitable once Athens made the Delian League, and there was basically no way of actually securing Athenian dominance across the Greek mainland. Now, if it would have been like Athens and Sparta were allies and Athens secured dominance at sea while Sparta secured dominance on land, they would have really, really, really been an unbeatable team. I mean, that is just a combination that is so deadly that Greece would have been impossible to take down, and it would have been impossible for any other city-state to exist in Greece at all. But no, they fought, and land wins, because, again, people, land creatures. So that is really the answer to the question of why Athens didn't become like Rome, because they just weren't cut out for it. I mean, maybe they were cut out for it because of all their prosperity. I mean, Athens was a very prosperous center of Greek culture, if I do say so myself. They were incredible beyond belief as far as their economics and navy and dominance and, you know, determination and will and strength and all that sort of stuff that makes a city-state great. Athens was right up there with Sparta and Corinth, and they were even above Corinth, and Boeotia, the Boeotian League, and all those other states, and Elis, which surprisingly remained independent for a long time. And Athens had that going for them, but they just didn't focus in the right direction. They thought Greece is a collection of islands, and they forgot that Greece is actually primarily land. Like large swaths of land linked together, I mean. And it was for that reason that Athens fell short of being like the Roman Empire. And so that will really be all, my friends, my Philhellenes. That will really be all on Athens. And I'm going to finish this off by coming over here to the edge and just showing you what Attica looks like. So here it is. We're standing atop one of the edges of the Acropolis, looking down on Athens. You can see the walls going all the way around the city. And as I run around the top of this, you can really see how majestic Athens made itself and what they were aiming for as far as being a total Greek cultural masterpiece. which is what Athens really did become in a lot of ways, but they ultimately fell short of domination and conquest just because it just isn't feasible for a naval power to dominate land. It just isn't going to happen. And the Delian League was never really an empire. It was always what they called it, a league. It was just a league. It was a league of Greek city-states that actually were independent. They weren't... I gotta do this zipline. They weren't totally 100% subservient to Athens. An invisible spear point to zipline with. Now that's pretty cool. So here we are, Athens. Very beautiful, very powerful. Don't want to mess with them for sure. Definitely still one of the greatest Greek nations that's ever lived, but ultimately defeated by the even better Greek nation, Sparta, in the Peloponnesian War. And I will eventually be making a video about every Greek city-state that I find interesting, which is pretty much every one in existence. And I'm going to be making videos about Corinth and the Boeotian League and Elis even. Elis is very interesting, their story. I was reading about them not long ago and very interesting. So stay tuned for all those different videos on various Greek city-states, but coming up next, Sparta and Spartan hegemony and the answer to the question of why Sparta never became like Rome. And they certainly could have, but they just were falling short of one little aspect that basically made it, the fact that they fell short of that made it impossible for them to become like the Roman Empire. So, have a great time, you Phil-Hellenes, and I will see you in the next video. The Ancient Greek is out.